Hello, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you again today to our Spring 2021 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. I'm now pleased to present this session on award management, which is going to cover all the things you need to know once you've received an award from NSF.
Welcome to the Virtual Grants Conference. This presentation will focus on awards management. Next slide. This presentation will feature Kandis Boyd, Michael Horneffer, and also Jeff Vieceli. I am the Deputy Divisional Director of DGA. Michael Horneffer is the Grants and Agreements Officer in DGA, and Jeff Vieceli is the Systems Administrator and Head of Systems Office in DIAS. Next slide. So today we're going to cover several topics. We will talk about the awards process, award processing delays, post-award notifications and requests, no-cost extensions, award transfers, awardee responsibilities, and keys to success. Next slide. So first, what does DGA and DIAS stand for? DGA stands for the Division of Grants and Agreements, and DIAS stands for the Division of Institution and Award Support. On this slide, you see the mission for both divisions, and that is for DGA to support the issuance of NSF assistance awards and other agreements by providing business, financial, and award administration assistance from pre-award through closeout. The mission of DIAS is to provide sustained excellence in stewardship across the grants life cycle through state-of-the-art business practices and exemplary business assistance to key stakeholders within NSF and across the research community to demonstrate organizational excellence, agility, and innovation in ensuring NSF leadership within the federal R&D enterprise. Next slide. So many of you are familiar with this graphic. This represents the NSF award process. So in a nutshell, we start with proposal preparation and submission, then a program review, and if approved, then the award is submitted to DGA for review. We have 3 branches that process the award. If the award is approved, then we have a grants officer provide approval and an award notice is issued. Next slide. So what kind of awards are issued by DGA? The vast majority of our awards are assistance awards, in which the principal purpose of which is to transfer anything of value from NSF to the grantee for them to carry out a public purpose and not to acquire property or services for NSF's direct benefit or use. In addition to assistance awards, DGA also issues grants, cooperative agreements, and fellowships. Next slide. So how many award actions does DGA process each year? Well, if you look at this slide and add up the numbers, you can see it's on the order of 22,000. And if it's broken down, you see that it is approximately 12,000 new awards each year, approximately 5,000 supplements and continuing grant increments, and approximately 5,000 non-funded actions. Next slide. So what are some common reasons for a delay in award processing? 1, overdue project reports. 2, not following solicitation requirements. 3, missing IRB or IACUC approvals. Or 4, unallowable or unjustified budget items. I'll now turn it over to Jeff to continue our discussion.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to start off As Kandis mentioned, one of the things that will slow down processing of your proposal are overdue project reports. As you can see, some of the things that happen with overdue project reports is it can affect all of the future funding for that subject award, as well as any associated awards that the PI or co-PIs might be working on as well. So it's not just that one particular award, it's a spider web type of thing where we are looking for those reports to be submitted. We also have, it blocks not only funding, but it also blocks administrative actions. As you also see there, it impacts other PIs or co-PIs. The last bullet there under consequences is under the new uniform guidance, the new 2 CFR 200 that came out August 13th. The NSF as well as other federal agencies will need to start reporting anyone that has overdue final project reports or any reports after 1 year from the end date of the award. They will be reported to FAPIS, which is the Federal Awardee Procurement Information Integrity System, I believe, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In terms of the annual and final project reports, they are approved by the program officer, so the submission of the report really isn't the final piece. It really does, the PIs have to submit the reports, but the POs have to approve those, and it's the approval that basically is what clears our system. It's not just submission. Annual project reports are currently due 90 days prior to the end of the budget period, and final project reports are due within basically from the end date of the award through 120 days after the end date of the award. They have to be submitted. If it comes in on the 121st day, it would be considered overdue. In many cases, the overdue project reports really do affect end of the fiscal year processing for DGA. We've had occasions where people have lost out on getting a supplement. Even just this past fiscal year, there were people, they had, there was $1 million that was set to be released, but it couldn't be released because the project had an overdue project report. And that kept that $1 million from being supplemented to that award. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. The project outcomes reports for the general public, the PORs. This is a unique report that is only the National Science Foundation requirement. It's like a final project report. It is also due 120 days after the end date of the award. It is not approved by the program officers, however. It is actually published verbatim by what the PI submits, and we don't really get involved. The NSF doesn't really get involved in the content of those reports. In terms of other information, the NSF does send out reminder notices. We send out the reminder notices when the project reports are due, as well as when they are overdue. Those reminder notices get sent to the PI, as well as all co-PIs, as well as the SRO. The report requirements are available to the PI. If they log into research.gov, the PIs can see their report requirements. The SRO can also run a report that shows them all of the project reports for their portfolio. Only the PI and co-PIs, however, can submit the reports. The SRO does not have any access to submit the reports. And if you're ever in doubt about the project reports, you should contact your program officer and or DGA to get more information or to ask questions. You can also contact the help desk. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. In the PAP guide, there is language, and it is part of NSF policy that basically states that when you submit as the PI or co-PIs, you submit that final project report, and we have similar language for the POR. When you submit those reports, it is an indication that you've completed the entire project. You've done the scope of work for the project. So if you're looking to get a no-cost extension, if you're looking to have a supplement issued, if you're looking to have a PI transfer of the award, don't supply that final project report or the PORs, even if they are overdue. The NSF has mechanisms that allow for those awards, the subject award, to be transferred or get a supplement or get no-cost extensions if they have overdue reports only on that award. So we can handle those situations. I know lots of times program officers tell you to submit the reports and get them in, but unfortunately, once they're submitted, it is an indication that you've completed the award. So it makes it difficult for us to reverse those. And it creates situations where it takes additional time to actually clear the reports. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Basically, these are the warning banner messages that appear in research.gov for the final project report as well as for that POR. Again, this is repeating that same language from the PAP guide. And again, it is that warning that says, more or less, don't submit this report if you're planning to do something or if you have not completed the project. You really should be, as a PI or a co-PI, you really should be in contact with your SRO and making determinations about whether or not you need a no-cost extension or how much money is available on the award and what is left to be performed in terms of the scope. In terms of the NSF policies, if you come in and you say, I have money left over on the award or there's still money left, that does not equate to you have not completed the project. So in and of itself, having money left does not mean that you're going to get a no-cost extension. It really is about the scope of the project and the work. Has the work been completed? And I think the next slide is Michael.
Thank you, Jeff. So looking at solicitation requirements, DGA reviews each proposal against its applicable program solicitation to ensure that they meet the appropriate compliance requirements. For proposals involving human subjects, proposing organizations are required to conform to 45 CFR 690, and this is the federal-wide policy for the protection of human subjects. For proposals involving vertebrate animal research, proposing organizations are required to comply with the Animal Welfare Act. So now, the most important point here is that if a solicitation or proposal includes human subjects or indicates vertebrate animal research, DGA will verify that the appropriate IRB approval, exemption, or the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, or IACUC, certification has been submitted before the award is made and not after. In cases where you might have a PI with a project that lacks definite plans for overseeing human subjects, you could submit a certification invoking 45 CFR 690.118 and state that no work with human subjects, including recruitment, is allowed to begin until the IRB approval has been obtained. Next slide, please. Proposal budget review is an area where DGA's grants officers typically spend a lot of their time. Some more specific areas of concern where we look are the participant support and other direct cost categories. For participant support, you'll want to pay attention to the definition of participant support costs, which is included in the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, where that acronym is the PAPG. The definition is restrictive and controls the sorts of activities and items that you could cover using participant support funds. So here, you want to be careful not to embed unallowables. In other direct costs, DGA tends to scrutinize the subaward and other categories. For subawards, or budget line item G5, you'll want to make sure that a separate subaward budget is included as part of the proposal budget. DGA will not authorize a subaward arrangement that doesn't have the separate breakdown of subaward costs. For other or budget line item G6, it's important to disaggregate and list what's being funded in this category. For instance, if your G6 costs include tuition remission, lab fees, and software licenses, you'll want to itemize and list the costs for each of those requests. Next slide, please. Looking at indirect costs, you'll want to make sure that you're applying your most recently negotiated indirect cost rate agreement schedule. And that's the agreement that was in effect at the time of proposal submission. You should also adhere to that specific agreement and schedule over the award's period of performance. So, if you have a supplemental fund request in an out performance year, you should apply the original negotiated indirect cost rate agreement to that budget. For budget justifications, these shouldn't go for more than 5 pages, and each line item should be addressed. And typically, we see narrative descriptions for each budget category included in the justification. Lastly, all funding requests should be in congruence with your organization's policies and procedures, as well as your organization's cost accounting methodology. In other words, you shouldn't request funding in a manner that your own organization wouldn't support. Next slide, please. So here are a few of the typical questions that DGA receives. We had talked about participant support costs, and please remember to carefully check what you're requesting to be covered by this cost category. You should also keep in mind that removing or rebudgeting funds out of the participant support cost category on a post-award basis requires prior approval from NSF. For subaward requests submitted on a post-award basis, these have to be submitted through FastLane and they have to have a DUNS number. You should also keep in mind the award management and oversight provisions flow down to your subaward organizations. So you'll have to conduct your own monitoring and oversight activities to ensure that your subawarding organizations are compliant with NSF policy. For award closeout, for the most part, NSF has automated this process. However, if an award contains a special term or condition, or if some certain reporting requirement needs to be filled prior to closeout, and here, for instance, an example would be if an award has cost share reports that need to be submitted, DGA will work with the program office and you to make sure that these are fulfilled before authorizing the closeout. Next slide, please. So this is the Research Terms and Conditions Appendix A. We included only one page here, and I believe that there are 4 pages, but the document includes a list of restricted categories that require NSF's prior approval. In some instances, you'll have a prior approval category that NSF has waived, such as for the rebudgeting of requests between direct cost categories that exceed 10%. For a category like this, NSF has vested unilateral rebudgeting authority with its awardee institutions. And this is also a great resource to have on hand, and it's publicly facing and available on the NSF DIAS policy webpage. Next slide, please. If your PI or co-PI has to leave the project for more than 3 months, and for instance, for personal reasons, or if she or he is taking a sabbatical, you as the authorized organizational representative should submit a prior approval request through research.gov. Going back to the previous slide, long-term disengagement requests are another restricted cost category in the research terms and conditions that require prior approval from NSF. So it's important that you track what your senior project personnel are doing to avoid the possibility of award termination for non-compliance. Nobody wants that. Next slide, please. Just to further add to our participant support cost discussion, again, participant support's another restricted category in the research terms and conditions prior approval matrix. But there are also some caveats of this category that you'll want to pay close attention to. First, moving or rebudgeting funding out of the participant support cost category requires prior approval from NSF. And specifically, that approval should come from your cognizant NSF program officer. The second is that while moving funds into the participant support cost category generally does not require prior approval from NSF, if a rebudgeting action transfers funds into the other cost category of participant support, and this category can be seen on NSF standard budget forms. In this case, NSF prior approval will be required from DGA. And the reason for this we had touched on before, but NSF requires a prior approval review to transfer funds into the other participant support cost category so that the grants officer can determine if the funding request is allowable. I'll now hand it back to Jeff to discuss no-cost extensions.
Okay. As Michael said, I'm going to talk a little bit about no-cost extensions. I already mentioned a little bit about no-cost extensions whenever I was talking about overdue project reports. The first thing that I want to talk about with no-cost extensions is, again, a reminder. A no-cost extension is not, I have money left on my project, therefore I'm going to get a no-cost extension. If you write that into your justification for a no-cost extension, it will be declined. It will be returned to you. And again, it is about the scope of the project. It is the work that's being done. I haven't completed the work that I said I was going to do, therefore I need more time. It is not based upon the money. That is a federal, it's in the Uniform Guidance policy as well as an NSF policy. So some of the other things about no-cost extensions, we will not extend an award that has a zero balance. Again, if you've spent all of the money, there is no more project. That project is done. The awards cannot be, again, I've already mentioned the second bullet. Again, it's not about the expending of funds. It is about the scope of work. Grantee approved no-cost extensions need to come in 10 days, at least 10 days prior to the end date of the award. If you come in on the 8th day, you will not be able to submit that grantee approved no-cost extension. You're going to get an error message. And research.gov has actually been programmed that it will automatically select what type of no-cost extension you're going to be eligible for based upon our rules. As you can also see, NSF approved no-cost extensions need to come in 45 days prior to the end date. And that is to give the program officer enough time to completely review the no-cost extension request and look at other circumstances behind the award to see if they are going to approve that no-cost extension. In most cases, the first NSF approved no-cost extension is approved by the program officer, and subsequent NSF approved no-cost extensions are approved by the Division of Grants and Agreements, or grants officer. You can submit the NSF approved no-cost extensions late, but you will be forced to enter a reason. You have to explain why. Why did I miss this 45-day window? We also verify once you actually get the no-cost extension, you will either get an amendment letter from DGA saying that it's been extended, or you'll get an email back from the program officer. And if you do a grantee approved no-cost extension, you get an email back basically from research.gov. Once you get one of those things, the emails and or the amendment letter, you want to go back into Fastlane and you just want to double check that the end date has actually been extended to what you believe it was going to be. You can also check the end date in iTrack, or not iTrack, I'm sorry, in research.gov under the ACMS, the Accounts Cash Management Service. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. You may or may not know this, but NSF money is not good forever. Our appropriations actually expire. So when we make you an award, and basically 6 years after we make you that award, those funds cancel. They go away. The NSF doesn't even control that. The U.S. Treasury controls that. So you only have a certain amount of time in which you can actually expend those funds. So the NSF tries to help you stay on track with expending those funds. We will send you, if we get to basically the 5th year and you have not expended what we believe to be enough of the funds, and you will have funds that will cancel and will be taken away from you, we will send an email to the SRO to let them know that these funds are out there and they are scheduled to cancel at the end of that fiscal year. I believe we now start sending those emails in December, and we follow back up again several times throughout the year so that we don't get to a situation where it's September 20th and those funds are going to cancel and you're caught unprepared. We don't want that to happen, and I don't think you want that to happen. So we try to communicate with you that those funds are going to cancel, that you do need to draw down funds. However, the drawdown is not, again, just to draw down funds. It has to be to cover your expenses. So you have to have expenses to cover the drawdowns. If an auditor came in and you said, oh, well, we got this email that told us we needed the drawdown funds, so we drew down funds, they're not going to really take that as any sort of an excuse. They're going to say, but the drawdown had to be to recoup expenses or to pay you back. The other last point here is that research.gov, if you come in to do a no-cost extension, you will get a message on the screen that shows you there is canceling appropriation on this award. We are not going to allow you to extend this award beyond the canceling appropriation. So if we go ahead to the next screen, this is that error message that you would see in research.gov. If I went out to an award that had canceling appropriation and I tried to, the appropriation cancels at the end of the fiscal year, which would be September 30th of whatever fiscal year it is. If I tried to extend and supply and input a no-cost extension with an end date of, we'll say, October 31st of that fiscal year, I would get this error message basically telling me you're exceeding the canceling appropriation. You need to basically take this back. You can go through September 30th, but I would point out to you that generally the last few years, because NSF has changed our accounting system, we are closing out for awardee drawdowns, usually around the 23rd or 24th of September. So you would need to come in to the NSF and do a final drawdown in accordance with that closeout date. So you couldn't come in on September 27th and try to do a drawdown because our financial accounting system is down for the fiscal year. So there are a lot of moving pieces with that canceling appropriation. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. Grant transfers, award transfers, PI transfers, however you want to refer to it. Again, there are a lot of questions that pop up about our transfer process. While we call it and refer to it as a PI transfer, it is really an award transfer. It is transferring an award from one organization to another organization. And as you can read, the first point up here is that the grants are made to the awardee and not to the PI. So it is the awardee's decision as to what happens with that award. So if a PI goes to the awardee and says, I took another job or I'm leaving and I want to take my grant with me, the awardee organization basically has these 4 things that they can do. They can actually keep the award themselves and nominate a new PI. They can request to actually do a sub-award with the PI's new organization and still, again, keep that award. They can agree to transfer the award to the new organization, or they can actually choose to terminate the award altogether. Basically, for any of these situations, there should really be conversation between the NSF and the program office, as well as the grants officers. So again, you want to make sure that there's communication. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. Some additional things to remember about award transfers, PI transfers. For a career award, really the only options are number 3 and number 4 from the previous slide, because we can't nominate a new PI because the career award was actually granted to a specific PI. So the old awardee can't just replace that PI. The original award, if the original award included EPSCoR funds, which is the established program to stimulate competitive research, if it was made and it had EPSCoR funds, and now the PI is moving to a state that is not a recognized EPSCoR state, we cannot transfer those funds to the new award. Fastlane will allow you to include that in your transfer requests, but when it comes to DGA will actually get error messages and they won't be able to actually approve that. So you have to be aware of, again, whether you're in an EPSCoR state or a non-EPSCoR state and the transfer back and forth. We can transfer anything to an EPSCoR state. We just can't transfer money that's EPSCoR funds from an EPSCoR state to a non-EPSCoR state. The last point here is very important. Do a reconciliation before you do your PI transfer, your award transfer. Make sure that you are transferring the correct amount of money. I would look at whether or not you have all of your bills from your subawardees. If you have subawardees, I would make sure that you have all of your invoices from your equipment taken care of. I would make sure that you've accounted for any of your payroll that you have not yet input into the system and done a drawdown if you are the original organization. Because once NSF approves and makes that transfer, we don't have a way of transferring money back and saying, oh yeah, you forgot to include this $5,000 piece of equipment. Let's give you back $5,000. We don't have that mechanism. So again, the reconciliation and making sure that all the numbers are correct is very important. And it's just a step that I would include in my process. Let's go ahead to the next slide. We also, sort of changing gears here a little bit, the NSF has been involved in a multi-year project to upgrade our awards management system. As we move to the new award management system, we did take the opportunity to change our award notices. You're all probably very familiar with our new format. We implemented the first change for no-cost extensions, went out in March of 2018. We then continued with various other pieces. So you've been seeing these award notices. It gave us the opportunity to standardize, streamline, and simplify our award notices. It also is helping us make sure that we are in compliance with uniform guidance as well as other policies and procedures. It created an easy-to-read layout that is broken up into various sections and is easy to identify the pieces of information on the award and the award notice. It takes advantage of new technology. That's more for the NSF, as well as, again, that puts us into a position to utilize new technology better. Again, that's more for the NSF, but it does help the grantee community in the long run. Because if it takes less time for DGA to process an award, it's faster for them to get those awards out on the street and to the external community. And that was one of our goals as well. The other big thing here, as you'll see, is we did take the opportunity. We are now CCing the PIs and co-PIs on the award notices. If I could hear a big woo-hoo in the crowd, I'm sure I would. This is something that the community had been asking for a while, and we were not able to do that under our old technology, and we are now able to do that. So as of March of 2018 and all of the other award notices that we moved over, they are now CCing PIs and co-PIs. So we can move to the next slide, please. That leads me to the next slide here, and that has to do with PI transfers, award transfers, which we've already talked a little bit about. Again, they keep that same sort of general format and look and feel of the other notifications. This is the last award notice that we needed to upgrade. So at this point in time, when we move this out in November, everything in terms of a DGA, grants officer approval, will be in the new format. We still have things in the old legacy award system, but it is not anything that has anything to do with approvals or the award notices. We have additional plans to make a few tweaks to some of our notices, including PI transfer notices. And the last thing that I will mention is that this is not a redo of the PI transfer submission and processing process. This is really just the award notice at this time. At some point in time, we will be relooking at the PI transfer process when it moves from Fastlane into research.gov, but we don't really have a scheduled time frame for that. And let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And I believe this is Michael again.
Thank you, Jeff. We're now going to pivot to NSF monitoring activities. NSF has a number of tools at its disposal to monitor the progress of its projects. DGA's program officer counterparts engage in programmatic site visits to examine the technical and scientific progress being made on the projects. DGA and DIAS also have their own site visit tool, and this is called the Advanced Monitoring Program. We use advanced monitoring to examine the financial and business aspects of the project. The goal of our review is to identify areas where a grantee organization could potentially improve its grant administration practices. We also incorporate any compliance or performance-related issues brought to our attention by the NSF program officers so that we could better tailor our visits. Next slide, please. We had spoken a little bit about FAPIS, but looking at it now, NSF is required by the Uniform Guidance to report award terminations on the FAPIS website, and we're also required to review FAPIS before issuing new awards. The intent of the FAPIS-related regulation is to hold award recipients accountable and also to share award performance across federal agencies. This is essentially aimed at promoting results-oriented grant-making. Awardee organizations are also required to self-report certain proceedings to FAPIS. And just to discuss some recent updates to the FAPIS site, 2 CFR 200.344 now requires that NSF report in FAPIS any recipient who has failed to submit all required project reports within 1 year of an award's period of performance and end date. This would include annual reports, final reports, project outcome reports, and any other reports that may be required for closeout in accordance with the specific terms and conditions of the NSF award. Next, Kandis will wrap us up with some keys to success.
Thank you, Michael. So, what are some ways that you can be successful? First, comply with all relevant federal regulations and national policy requirements. Next, adhere to the terms and conditions of an NSF award. Read your award notice carefully. It may include project or award-specific requirements such as funding restrictions, special reporting requirements, and special terms and conditions or other instructions. Next slide. Make sure the award has an active PI. Manage your funds prudently. Make sure the funds are allowable, allocable, reasonable, and necessary. Track report requirements and establish appropriate policies and procedures, as well as oversight and internal controls. Next slide. Train your staff so they understand their roles and responsibilities. Be consistent and maintain timely and effective lines of communications. Know who to contact if you have, know who to contact for relevant information. So in general, PIs, you can contact your NSF program officer for technical or specific questions. You can contact your SRO for administrative questions. If you are an SRO, you can contact the DGA portfolio manager for award-specific conditions. Always remember to include the award number in any email or communication to assist DGA with responding to your inquiry promptly. SROs can also contact the NSF Policy Office with general grant policy questions. Next slide. Ask early and ask often. So again, thank you so much for participating in today's award management discussion. And if you have further questions, you can contact the NSF Division of Financial Management for questions related to payment, financial policy, financial reporting, and ACMS. Follow research.gov and FastLane direction and edits. Make sure that you read error messages received in research.gov and FastLane, and take screenshots to include in emails that you send to the help desk or to the PO. Remember to submit sub-recipient information to the Federal Subaward Reporting System. And for questions regarding research.gov, you can contact the help desk at 1-800-381-1532. For FastLane questions, you can contact 1-800-673-6188. And also on this slide, we have listed both the websites for the Policy Office as well as the DGA website. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will now open the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you. So we have received a lot of questions during the recording, and we've been answering a lot of questions as well. So hopefully you've been able to see the answers to the questions that my colleagues and I have been furiously typing away here while the presentation was going on. We do have about 30 minutes for Q&A, and so what I'd like to do is just go through the questions that we have. Again, we may not get to all of your questions, but we're going to try to get through as many as we can. So I'll say also to my colleagues who are there, if you see something that a question that you want to bring up prior to one that I'm choosing here, please just go ahead and do that. The first question is, how do we complete reporting requirements when a PI is not responsive to completing the reporting requirements? So there's a PI, they're at the end of their career, they're not getting that final report in. What should the institution do about this?
Jeremy, I could field that one if you'd like.
Yeah, please jump right in. Whoever would like to answer.
Great. So in instances where you may have senior project personnel that are in transition, or if they've left the institution, or in some cases even deceased, what we do in those situations is we work with your sponsored research office, who will then work with, typically it's the department chair, and the institution is responsible for replacing that senior person with another person who's qualified from a technical standpoint to submit that report. So that's typically what we've done in the past. Jeff might be able to talk to a little bit about what goes on technically if they need to have a report rescinded or otherwise handled differently.
Michael is exactly correct. I would always basically provide you the guidance to contact the program officer. Where we do have ways that you can submit a project report for API, but in general, you're their employer. You certainly have some sort of that stick that you can use to get people to submit their project reports. If they're still on payroll, again, it might be a little drastic, but you could certainly hold paychecks. But again, there are things that you can do, but the first thing that I would do is tell you to reach out to either DGA or the program officer and find out what options are available, because we do have things that we can do.
Okay. For the next question, they're asking about for subawards, can they approve budget reallocation requests as the prime, or does it have to go to NSF when there's no change in scope? Additionally, if a subawardee had originally budgeted participant support costs, but needs to reallocate out of participant support costs to another part of the budget, how do they submit these requests to NSF as the prime?
Jeremy, could you repeat the first part of the question? I'll answer them in the.
Yeah, so for subawards, they're writing, can they say, can we approve budget reallocation requests as the prime? So if the subaward is wants to reallocate funds.
Yes. So as the prime awardee, you can think of yourself as a mini NSF. The prior approval requirements flow down from you to your subaward entities that you choose to subcontract with. So in essence, you would be charged with basically providing prior approval for them to rebudget funding out of the participant support cost category, which I think was the second part of that two-part question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So we have a question asking if we could talk a little bit more about the newer requirement to provide updated current and pending support documentation in the research performance progress report. And they're asking, is this in the current RPPR instructions? And I will answer that one. Last year, late summer, early fall, the NSF implemented the revised research performance progress report, which had the requirement that if there had been a change in other active support, either since the award was made or since the last reporting period, that you need to provide NSF with an updated current and pending support documentation as part of your annual and or final report submission. So that is a requirement. It is in the instructions, in the RPPR instructions, and hopefully that answers that question. The next one we have, if you reduce a subaward funding and move it to the primary award, how do you handle the reallocation or recalculation, excuse me, of indirect costs on the primary award if the funding was moved into a line item that has indirect costs associated with it? Jeff, I think this was one you wanted to respond to.
I was just going to say that the NSF gives the awardees very broad latitude to do budget changes once we make the award to you. That is not something that you actually need to come back to the NSF for. There are very few categories that you need our prior approval for. Those would be participant support costs, and that's really moving funds out of participant support. If you wanted to move additional funds into participant support, we wouldn't care. And then there are the alterations of $25,000 or more, basically construction. If it's not one of those two categories, the NSF, we don't have to approve anything. We don't need to do anything. So it's really coming down to your accounting and you keeping track of those records.
Okay, thank you. Next question, does the final project report follow the same template as the annual report? And is there a template for the project outcomes report?
I can handle both of those. Yes, the final project report follows the same format as the annual project report. We use the federal federal performance project report, the FFR, or I'm sorry, I'm getting
research
confused.
Performance Progress
Research Performance Progress Report, the RPPR format. It's a government-wide format. So it is the same for the APR and the FPR. The POR, there is no real format. It is a free form. I believe it's 200 words or less. Just it's supposed to be written for the general public, so it's not supposed to be technical. And there are some very broad guidelines provided in the PAP guide, as well as I believe research.gov has some help tips. But there really isn't a format for the PLR.
And all of them are submitted in research.gov.
That's correct.
I don't know that I don't know if we have the expertise here for this next question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. For institutions or researchers who do not have access to an IRB, does NSF have any recommendations in that respect?
Yeah, I agree. I think we might need to refer that question.
Okay, we'll get back to you on that one. We'll get in touch with you on that one with some recommendations. Can applicants with a negotiated indirect cost rate elect to take a lower indirect percentage, lower than the negotiated rate, in order to allocate more funding to the project?
The answer to that is no. That would be considered cost sharing, and we would not allow that.
Right,
You should,
right.
Yeah, NSF would require you to use your negotiated indirect cost rate.
Okay, how long does it take for a project to be transferred? Are PIs and subawards put on a stop work order until the award transfer is complete?
I can go ahead and answer that one again. Basically, the time frame varies. It really depends on the program officer that you're dealing with. It also depends on the time of year. As DGA gets busier towards the end of the fiscal year, they have more actions to approve, so it might take longer than, say, a PI transfer that came in October. And again, it's based upon workloads, but generally NSF has roughly, once they get to DGA has a 30-day timeline that they try to adhere to in terms of getting everything out. So generally, I would say that they would take anywhere from 30 to 60 days, unless there's an issue with it. In terms of any sort of, until DGA approves the transfer, there is nothing that stops work, so that the original awardee, if they continue to do research and they continue to have drawdowns against those funds, they can do that. What ends up happening is the NSF would adjust the transfer amount if we need to account for any additional drawdowns. But yes, until that transfer has been approved, the original award is still in force.
Okay, next question is, if the terms and conditions state that prior approval is waived, do we still need to go into fast lane to do rebudgeting?
This might be a question for policy, but my take on it would be no. If it specifically says that it's waived, you shouldn't have to do anything other than keep your documentation.
That is correct. That is the right answer. Okay. Question is, what are the repercussions for being reported in FAPIS?
Nobody wants to be reported to FAPIS. The repercussions are that, again, it stays out there. It is a publicly facing website. It is considered to be a material non-compliance with the terms and conditions of a federal grant. It stays out there and is visible for 5 years. There is no way to delete it once it is uploaded. The awardee organization does have the ability to add sort of their side of the story and add comments. But again, it's out there and there's no way to delete it. DGA, the NSF, as well as all other federal agencies have to report to, or will have to report to, FAPIS, and they will have to basically look at FAPIS before they make any awards to an organization, the PI or any active co-PIs that were on the award that were reported to FAPIS, and they will have to make a determination about whether or not they should make additional awards to those entities. So it is nothing that anybody wants to be reported to. So I would get your report submitted as quickly and on time as much as I possibly can. If there are issues, contact your program officer as soon as you know that there are issues.
Thank you. So we have a question, and this might be for you, Michael, about participant support costs, and really maybe trying to understand what they are and what are the categories within the participant support cost category. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So if you look at the standard NSF budget form, you can see that there are different categories of support embedded within PSC. I think where there is typically some confusion is that other category at the last line item in the participant support cost category. There, DGA does heavily scrutinize costs that are requested in that particular line item. Typically what I've seen in the past are people requesting, for instance, meals or refreshment or meeting or logistical support costs through that other PSC category. And you want to be very careful in those instances. So if you're working on a proposal budget and there's a question as to whether something should be placed within PSC, in the case of logistical support for meetings, or in the other direct cost category, you should first write to your cognizant grants and agreements officer.
Great, thank you. Can NSF send notifications to SPOs when reports are submitted by PIs, similar to the notifications that are sent when reports have been approved?
I've made a note of that, and I can take that back to the various offices that control the project report. So.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. This person is asking if there is a difference between the proposal budget of a grant and a cooperative agreement.
Jeremy, I could take this one. So the official definition of a cooperative agreement is that it's a grant, but a grant that requires more extensive involvement on the part of the federal government. So cooperative agreements technically will typically have expanded award-specific financial and administrative terms and conditions, as well as award-specific programmatic terms and conditions that in some instances may require special reporting requirements, or it could require some enhanced level of interaction between the awardee organization and NSF. But put simply, a cooperative agreement is just another grant. It requires more extensive involvement on the part of the federal government.
Okay, next question is, can we pay for foreign travel expenses for a foreign collaborator?
Just off of the top of my head, without looking at the budget overall, the only restriction that NSF would have with regards to funding foreign entities would be funding foreign organizations. There's a special approval process that we go through here internally at NSF. If it's bringing a foreign consultant on board, or just a foreign staff member on the project, we would not require a special approval process in that instance.
Right. The only thing I would add to that is that you'd want to look at the program solicitation, because the program solicitation could have some other restrictions on budgetary restrictions that might affect that.
Good point.
Let's see. Do notices of cancellations of appropriations only go to the financial contacts at the institution?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. And next question is, how can we track when an award has been fully transferred?
If you're the original awardee or the original award holder, at the moment you're going to see the status of that request will be updated. So you would have to log back into research.gov or Fastlane to see the status of that request. You would also see the status updated in the account cash management service in research.gov. We are working on providing basically another amendment or some sort of an official email from the NSF notification that the transfer has been approved. We do not have a time frame as to when we will do that, but it is out there as an action item for us. But currently you would check, if you're the new awardee, you're going to get an award amendment.
Okay, and keeping on with the theme of award transfers, a person is asking is there a standard process and for transfer to a new institution? Can you talk a little bit about the process and how that works?
Again, as the slide stated in the presentation, there are several different things that can happen when a PI leaves an organization. They can request to take their award with them, which is the PI transfer. The organization can keep the award and appoint a new PI, or they can just simply basically say, we're not transferring this to the new awardee organization. We also don't have someone that we want to replace it with or the PI with, so we're going to let it go ahead and cancel or terminate it early. So for the PI transfer, where you're actually, there is the notification, or I'm sorry, the request is still in Fastlane. So Fastlane will guide you through what you need to do, but basically the original awardee organization goes in and they start the request. There should be negotiation between the two parties about how much money will be transferred. There should be negotiation about the date of when the PI will leave and the project will move from one organization to the next. Hopefully all of that would be sometime in the future, rather than we do on occasion get the PI transfer request that comes in where the PI left 6 months ago. But NSF would prefer that we know about it prior to it happening, so that, again, the documentation can be done, the award can be processed and approved prior to the PI moving. There is a section in the PAP guide that explains the PI transfer process. Again, as I mentioned during the presentation, is I would do a reconciliation of the costs. I'm at the original awardee. I want to make sure I'm covering all the payroll, I'm covering all the subawards, I'm covering all equipment costs. So I'm subtracting everything out of the award that I need to subtract, even if I haven't drawn down those funds yet. So if you go into Fastlane and you start that process, again, the original awardee will put in the amount of what the transfer is supposed to be, the date that it's supposed to move. They will then, when they are done with it, it shifts over to the new awardee, who will then enter the budget details for the amount that's being transferred to them. And they will sign off on it and submit it to the NSF. It comes into the NSF, the program officer does a review. If they are okay with it, they then approve it, and it goes to DGA for DGA to do the final approval.
Jeff, you talked about in your presentation the new PI transfer notice. Can you clarify when that went into effect?
I believe we moved that over in late September, early October of last year, 2020.
Okay. Okay, let's see. So we had a number of, we still have a number of questions, and we also received some questions in advance. Let's see. So here's a question that we received. Could administrative stipend for a PI, part of the approved award budget, be paid in equal increments over the academic year versus one lump sum payment during the summer months? Michael, did you want to take that one?
Yes, absolutely. So to give you some basic guidance on this one, NSF awards are, for the most part, cost reimbursable, which means that the drawdown of funding should generally correspond to invoices related to the activity in question. Now, for something like the potential issuance of lump sum payments at a certain time in the year, I would have to say that any proposed drawdown of obligated funds from ACMS should be done in alignment with your institution's internal policies and procedures.
Okay, here's a question on F&A rates. If the negotiated F&A rate at the time of proposal was used and the rate changed for the fiscal year that the award was received, can the recipient keep the proposed rate for the proposed segment of the years?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, this is prior to obligation. Is that correct?
That's how I'm interpreting that, yes.
I see. So generally, the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement that was submitted at the time of the original submission is the one that we apply an obligation. And the reason for this is typically when NSF receives a proposal, it could be in programmatic and financial review from anywhere from a few months to a year, or even in some cases over a year. So we typically apply the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement that we received at point of proposal submission, and that's one that we use for obligation.
Okay, let's see. Can you please define participant support costs? Can we get a definition of that? Michael, do you want to give that one a go?
Sure, absolutely. And what I could do is actually read the definition of participant support costs from the PAPG. So the participant support budget category refers to direct cost items such as stipends or subsistence allowances, travel allowances, and registration fees paid to or on behalf of participants or trainees. And this is an important caveat here, but not employees in connection with NSF-sponsored conferences or training projects. Any additional categories of participant support costs other than those described in 2 CFR 200.75, such as incentives, gifts, souvenirs, t-shirts, and memorabilia, must be justified in the budget justification, and such costs will be closely scrutinized by NSF. And I had alluded to that point previously in the presentation, and also in response to another PSC-related question, but that particular definition is in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide on page II-18.
Okay, here's a question. If a PI does not include a postdoc in the proposed budget, but then later needs to hire a postdoc later, are they required to submit a postdoc mentoring plan, and how would they do that?
Sure, that's a great question. So on a post-award basis, if you're bringing on a postdoctoral student, one, you just want to make sure that there's no alteration to the technical directives or the scope of the award. And if that condition isn't violated, then prior approval from NSF is not required. However, you'll want to work with your cognizant NSF program officer to make sure that they have a copy of the postdoctoral mentoring plan. And the NSF program officer will work with your grants officer to make sure that that documentation is uploaded to NSF systems.
Okay, here's a question asking, is it possible to ask for a third extension? And if so, what documentation would be required?
I can handle that one. It all depends on the situation with the award. NSF doesn't really have any hard and fast rules about the number of no-cost extensions that you can receive, other than, again, the idea behind the canceling appropriations. So if you have an award that has funds that will not cancel, you could get as many no-cost extensions as you need. You would just go out to research.gov and complete the no-cost extension request and provide the information that's there. Again, the reason for the no cost extension is not I have funds left. The reason for the no cost extension is I have not completed the scope of the work. And here's what I have left to do. Here's an estimate of the amount of money that I have. Here's how long I think it's going to take. But again, just in general, there really isn't anything that would prevent you from getting a third no cost extension other than the canceling of the appropriations.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. And this is, again, on a no-cost extension. Can a co-PI submit a no-cost extension request, or is only the PI able to do that?
Yeah, the NSF treats PIs and co-PIs exactly the same. So the co-PI, if they chose to, could submit a no-cost extension request. They don't submit it directly, however. It does go through the SRO, but they could prepare it and start the process. Same thing with project reports. Co-PIs could prepare and submit the project reports, just like the PI can.
Okay. I know we have a lot of questions we didn't get to answer. There are a lot of available resources to you on the NSF website. Particularly, there are proposal and award frequently asked questions on the Policy Office website that I would recommend you take a look at. A lot of your questions can be answered in those FAQs. I want to thank you for joining us today. There will be one more session this afternoon covering the Faculty Early Career Development Program. So hopefully you'll be able to attend that one as well. And there will be more sessions tomorrow and on Friday. Please do check the agenda. I want to thank you again, thank all my colleagues and presenters, and thank all of you for attending, and please have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.